Eyes bright, chins up, smiles on. So a couple of weeks back, I shared with you my journey of rereading The Hunger Games in preparation for the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Understandably, obviously, a lot of you asked me to share my thoughts on the new book, so this video is an attempt at that. However, it wasn't the easiest beast to tame, as will become evident in this video. But I thought, as we've established, I am in the capital, as are you. You are watching from the Suzanne Collins version of the capital, and for that reason I thought it was only fair to ask a real capital citizen her view on President Snow, as well as my layman's aspiring socialist, capital citizen in denial view of what Suzanne Collins is trying to do with this prequel. So you will get Effie Trinket's opinion on this whole thing, but as I summon her... Wait, hold on. Can we talk about how Dillis Price this is right now? Norman! Ooh, Trevor, you never!
Oh, Norman! You're having an arm injury with special effects.
While I summon Effie Trinket, we're going to talk about Lena Norm's thoughts on the book. I'm surrounded by notes and books and makeup. And I pillow curled my hair last night to get that Effie look. So I guess it's working. This review is going to be very death of the author in that I haven't really looked up interviews with Suzanne Collins to find out what she says about why she did this sequel. But obviously there is always the looming monster over books that have huge fandom followings and the demand of the publishing industry to create more wealth. Which would be ironic, really, if you think about it, if Suzanne Collins really, wow. If Suzanne Collins was really doing it for that reason. And I doubt somebody who could write The Hunger Games would really be that into money. But I mean, J.K. Rowling turned out to not be that keen on social justice, so I can't really, we can't speculate on that. But for me, as somebody who loves the fandom of The Hunger Games, what I was really looking for, I think, a zoom out, you know? I speculated a lot in the last video about whether this was supposed to be a climate change novel, or at least an imagination of what human decency was after a climate change kind of apocalypse. What we don't get is a real explanation as to what it was like before the war that caused Panem to be formed, and we don't get an insight into how we got from the world of, I don't know, drive-through McDonald's and Trident, we got to the world of the Hunger Games. Bing! And I was sad for that. I'm not gonna like include that as part of what would contribute to a bad review, because like I don't think that you should judge a book on what you wanted to get out of it. I think you should judge it on what its premise is and what it's trying to give you and whether it succeeds and what it promises, what it sets up. And she never promised us that, but by going back that far in her fictional world's history, 60 years, kind of makes you think that it's not going to be about the characters and it is going to be about the world. It's going to centre the world of the books more. What I feel like it actually did was give us another character-centred plot with some heavy-handed morals and not really shed any light on what we know about Katniss's story or answer any of the questions we had about how they got there. I don't know, I just felt like I still have so many unanswered questions, and I guess that's the job of fan fiction, to fill that in. But I don't know, I was just hoping for that, I guess. So on release day, I was very kindly sent a copy of the book that morning, 9 AM. It was couriered over. Very exciting. Oh my god! It's the real book! I knew they were gonna send it today, but like, it's fucking 9 AM. Well, well, well. Oh my god, it's really nice. Go on then. Craig just asked me for a sniff. Oh yeah, that's the good stuff.
Oh my god, like, that smell makes me want to read it. Get it in me.
I haven't smelt new books in so long. I did actually record my thoughts after I'd read the first part of 3, so here's that. I'm about here right now. Part 1 is over and I'm stressed. I think it's in a good way, but it's unclear at this point. I think it's done really well. Like, I'm still wanting to read a lot, and actually less is happening, especially after the stress of Mockingjay. This is a welcome break. So we've been taken back to the 10th Hunger Games. Coriolanus, which is the first name of President Snow. Sure. What kind of name is that? The Roman general who was famous for squashing various uprisings against the Roman Empire. We meet Coriolanus pretty close to when he meets his victor, his girl from District 12. So I like the fact that there wasn't that much of a suspense time for that, because I was like, I'm gonna need to know who this girl is and what she's like if I know whether I'm gonna be able to trust this book. And his victor is a girl from District 12, but she is so different to Katniss, and thank God. That was the first pothole in the road that I was like, let's not fall in there, Suzanne. She's the Dolly Parton, charming, verbose, excellent public speaker and performer, Lucy Gray. What some bright spark in the Gumption Club, my Patreon group, established when we were discussing the last video I made about the Hunger Games was that what I was missing was the fact that District 12 is clearly coded as the indigenous district. The emphasis on the straight hair, the connection to nature, the olive skin, the way they're described as the only district who are really connected to this very kind of tribal dancing, the only ones who still know ancient music. It was staring me in the face. But what's interesting about Lucy Gray, she seems to be from a travelling community that have been forced to stay in District 12, but like relatively recently for their people's ancient history. And she has curly dark hair and a rainbow dress, and I fucking love her. I will immediately be cosplaying as her. I just need to order the fabric. Coriolanus, can't say it straight-faced. He had a shit upbringing. We thought that was going to be the case, didn't we? Hurt people and all that. But there's lots of allusions and the emphasis on his own poverty. It's clear that when they were under siege, there was a lot of starvation, a lot of hunger. And there's also allusions not only to the fact that the whole way through Coriolanus' life he's been hungry, but also that he's watched other capital people eat dead people off the street. Like, it's pretty brutal. There are lots of like animalistic allusions to how they behaved during wartime, and like the contrast between that and the civility of the Snow family, who are it's very Draco Malfoy. They're a very established old family in the capital. They're very well known, and it's actually a secret that they've lost all their money and they live in this very grand apartment that's in fact quite shabby and empty on the inside, and they're really just eating cabbage soup to survive. That's where we meet Coriolanus when he's like 17, I think. It's been 10 years since the victory of the capital over the district and the establishment of the Hunger Games, which he had no part in. And he's not presented as a particularly sympathetic character. A lot of the things that he does are perceived by other people to be selfless, but what's important is that you're seeing his inner monologue, which is selfish, and he's like, I want to do this so I look good, I want to do this so I get something out of it, I got to do this so that this other thing happens that I want to happen. So he's perceived as very rich and very noble, but he's actually quite poor and quite like revolting in his choices, I think. He's really rooting for his victor, but it's clear that he doesn't see himself as very different to her and doesn't feel that sorry for her. But it also relates to what we were talking about in the last books about how much choice do you really have when you're under war? How much agency can we assume when it comes to growing up in a system like this and having the threat of your life against your brain all the time, pulsing against your choice valve? I've studied the brain. He talks about how brave Lucy Gray is for stepping up and being in the Hunger Games and being outspoken, and he's like, but if she's brave enough to be here, shouldn't I be? And then Lucy Gray cuts in saying, oh, for the record, I didn't have a choice to be there, that is. And then he says, for the record, neither did I. He's taken up this position as mentor because it might be the only way for him to be able to feed his family, because if he does well at it, he'll be able to go to university with funding. Otherwise he won't be able to go to university, and then he won't be able to earn money for his family, and he's very scared that they will starve and get eaten, essentially. Another thing that I'm relieved about is that there's not that many obvious allusions to the future and what we know as readers happens decades later. There's not too many Easter eggs, but there are nice little allusions. For example, somebody tells him, you're a rare bird, Coriolanus. There's lots of references to fire. They talk about a particularly controversial story about one of the victors and the kind of stir that they've caused, and the grandma says, it's just the kind of story that catches fire. The only other thing I'm picking up that refers to my other theories is the fact that they have this zoo in the capital that has been abandoned since the war because a lot of the species died out. And when the 10th round of victors are brought to the capital, they are put in the zoo, and there's lots of allusions there to obviously the capital having to become animals to survive and eat each other, but also putting the districts in this voyeuristic, like, museum style display of the districts being animals and being animalistic and not really being human. And they're even transported in a kind of circus cart to the zoo from the station, and it's pretty horrible. So yeah, so far I'm quite satisfied, and we're this far in and we haven't actually got into the Hunger Games yet. Which I imagine won't be as showy and as flashy as the Hunger Games that we know, because this is much further in the past and they don't really have any of the funding yet. They're only just introducing the concept of sponsors. Actually, Coriolanus is the provider there. He's the one who comes up with the idea of having sponsors and dropping food into the arena, which is an interesting, like, bread and circuses thing. Oh my god, the bread and circuses! They're literally bringing the circus in with the circus carts in the zoo. Oh my god. Also, did you know that Panem is actually short for Panem det Circenses, which Plutarch explains is in a language called Latin about a place called Rome. So some people still do know ancient history. Panem de Circenses translates to bread and circuses. The writer was saying that in the return for full bellies and entertainment, his people had given up their political responsibilities and therefore their power. And it is also done at the moment in a circle in an arena. And Coriolanus is a Roman name. It's all making so much sense, Suzanne. There's also an embellishment on the first page of each chapter that has this snake on it that I'm very much enjoying. Potentially because I'm in lockdown and everything is exciting at this point. Yeah.
After the first third, I continued to read, but to keep telling this tale just from the perspective of Snow was an interesting stylistic choice, but I think actually as a device it had some pacing shortfalls in that because the second part takes place in the arena, Snow is not in the arena for most of it. Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow, wow, wow. I'm just gonna leave this to like live for a little while before I style it because I just think it deserves to live. So anyway, to set the scene, I continue to read. We're in the arena. Wow. Apart from we're not in the arena, only Lucy Gray is in the arena. Our protagonist, the person we see the perspective of, and by the way, we're still not particularly liking or caring about, isn't there. Because she's written it so that a lot of the games happens underground and the audience can't see it. Like, to be fair, the whole plot is that it's actually quite a shit Hunger Games, and because it's not, you don't have to legally watch the Hunger Games at this point. Nobody really does. Because they haven't been trained yet to find, like, the fetishization of children killing children, like, interesting. Wild, I know. So the whole of the second part is essentially just waiting for Frank Churchill to turn up. And Frank Churchill didn't come, and Lucy Gray did not come above the rubble for 3 days, and nobody really dies. It's actually quite a boring Hunger Games. The views bomb. Sure, here goes nothing, I guess. Is this how you do it? I'm not sure. Obviously Snow, I can't say his first name seriously, let's move on from that. For the first year, they're trying to use the Hunger Games as a way to teach kids that are about to go to university about the purpose of war and the purpose of the capital, presumably so they can vet and prune them as the next generation of leaders, because obviously Panem has been in charge for like 10 years now, and they're probably thinking about succession. Oh my god. It worked. So yeah, what frustrated me was that even with the premise of being taught about the importance of Panem, that would obviously have been the time to insert some really interesting lessons about the beginning of Panem, how the world ended, climate change, stuff like that. So I felt that the second half like really dropped energy. Oh wow, this is horrible. This is horrifying. Thanks, I hate it. I'm going to attempt to set this soup of disaster with some powder. Those of you who watched my Gibson Girl transformation video will be happy to know that as of yesterday, I am the proud owner of a new highlighting powder. In that video, I used an 8-year-old powder, and everybody freaked the hell out in the comments and was like, Lena, you're going to get a skin disease. Powder expires after a year. You have had it for 8. Please treat yourself better. So thank you guys, I did. This palette has like a kind of basically a powder in the middle, so I'm using that, and then they've got highlighter on either side. Very exciting. So the third half of the book covers life after the Hunger Games. Lucy Gray wins the Hunger Games in a not particularly exciting or extended battle. He is patted on the back by peers and been like, you won the Hunger Games, even obviously he just watched another girl who he barely knows win the Hunger Games, but as the mentor he's treated like he has won. But because him and Lucy Gray colluded to kind of cheat in the Hunger Games, he gets banished to be a peacekeeper, which is the Hunger Games optimistic name for the police, if at best. And he chooses District 12 to get distributed to because that's where he knows Lucy Gray will be sent back to. Brilliant, great, lovely, romance. His very moral, innocent best friend, who he pretends to like but doesn't really, is sent back with him. Sorry, I've got to concentrate for this bit. There's just no two ways about this. Basically, in the third half, a lot of push-pull events happen. And at this point, I'm really ready to give up. I'm literally like, if I wasn't making a video about this, I don't know if I'd continue.
I can see it now, and I'm claustrophobic. Let me out.
If Snow had started off like kind of like standard human selfish and then had been moved towards evil in a very like interesting, considered way, then I'd probably have been like way more invested. But because I just felt like he wasn't, he was just like somebody who let stuff happen to him, and he wasn't really having an internal dialogue with himself about like morals or what he thinks about the world. He was just kind of like low-key mean. And then there's this wonderful scene right at the end. Obviously spoilers are about to happen because I said that sentence, but for some reason I feel the need to also tell you that there are spoilers. He basically betrays that friend that's been really good to him and hands him into the Capitol. The Capitol hang him in front of Snow and Lucy Gray. He murders somebody else that the Capitol don't know about, but he believes that the Capitol will find out, and he thinks that his like days are numbered basically. And he decides with Lucy Gray, because they both have nothing to lose, and Lucy Gray thinks she's going to be killed soon as well, that they should run away together. And because of that build-up, there's this completely absurd but also completely believable and very anxiety-inducing scene right at the end where they have escaped. He's fantasizing about this incredibly simple life that he's going to lead, where he just like fishes and has sex with Lucy Gray and lives the simple survival-only life, survival for the point of survival. And then he kind of thinks about how sad that is, because just before he actually went to meet her, when he'd agreed to escape, the Capitol are like, lol, you're definitely pardoned and forgiven, you can come back to the Capitol. Oh, and we're going to enroll you in university and train you to be a top government professional because you're obviously so clever. He's like, it's a shame, am I throwing my life away? And on that walk, he accidentally reveals to Lucy Gray that he has killed 3 people. To her knowledge, he's only killed 2. So she's like, who's the third person? Because she doesn't know that he has betrayed his best friend who's just been hung. They just watched him get hanged. And she's like, oh shit. And she kind of realises that he dobbed his friend in and he's responsible for his death. And the only redeeming feature of Snow for Lucy is the fact that he's trustworthy. On that walk, he has this internal monologue that's like, I always think she's so innocent, but maybe she's not. She is a victor after all, and he goes through all these animalistic analogies in his mind to remind himself that, like, just because she's a girl and because she's a singer doesn't mean she's not deadly as shit. They both had this conversation the day before where they realised that Lucy Gray's parents were killed by the Capitol and Snow's parents were killed by the rebels, and both secretly resent the other for that. And then the tone just changes completely on this walk where they're trying to walk away from the Capitol. They get to that building in the forest that's in the second book of the Hunger Games where Katniss discovers the people who are trying to get to District 13. They get to that building 60 years before that happens, and there are loads of weapons stored there. Long story, but one of the weapons has Snow's fingerprints on him for a murder that the Capitol don't know he committed, and he believes that they will one day find out that he has committed, and therefore he can't take up the offer of being a government official because they'll find out and he'll be dead. The murder weapon is in that building, and he realises that if he gets rid of that weapon he can go back to the Capitol, and his mind completely turns towards that. And it's maybe the space of 10 minutes he's decided that he should kill Lucy Gray because she's the only person that knows. He goes from completely Severus Snape, Lily obsessive to wanting to kill her. And they have this stalk off in the forest and he ends up shooting her dead. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my god, President Snow is an incel.
He loves women so much that he wants to kill them. Oh my god.
So that scene kind of just like redeemed the whole book for me, and I was like, this is really clever. We could have got to it a lot faster.
500 pages was not an acceptable amount of time to wait.
But I was worried that what would happen was that the reason that was given for Snow's behaviour was that he was shunned or betrayed or hurt by this woman.
But she actually doesn't betray him. She just realises that he could be dangerous, and that's enough for him to kill her. These eyelashes had a wonderful night out about a year ago, and they're about to be on my face again. But I don't consider going out to buy new eyelashes an essential trip, to be honest. Let me just concentrate for a second. Da-da-da.
Okay, I wrestled the eyelashes into subservience, but it wasn't a humane operation.
So basically, I have some more observations, but I think that, in essence, I was a little disappointed with the direction it went in, because it kind of didn't go in a direction, and it didn't really tell us any more facts about the world, like concrete facts, and it also didn't have any other kind of like, not that every book has to have morals, but like I feel like the overarching message of the trilogy was nobody wins war, and there was no slogan here apart from nobody ever won war or nobody wins war still. I don't know, I feel like because the fandom were probably really against her humanising Snow in any way, and because he's like a white straight male, with Margaret Atwood rewriting Aunt Lydia, she could place her in this system of oppression where she was still like being victimized and threatened and wasn't safe because she was a woman, so felt forced to become part of the system because she was in deep trauma and didn't feel like there was another way. And that still, she didn't, like, Margaret Atwood didn't rectify Aunt Lydia. I made a video about that here. The reasons she had for becoming evil were interesting, were informative, were brutally complicated, which is a fave. I didn't feel like we really got that from Snow. What his teachers did force out of him was this speech about what he loved about war, like the good parts of war, and why war would always be happening but should be contained. The idea of the games is to contain them within the arena, and something that was like one of the spoilers, one of the bigger reveals at the end of the book, is that there's this professor that kind of hates him the whole way through, and you realise it's because the professor is the person who came up with the idea for the Hunger Games when he was drunk, and then he didn't think it'd actually be a good idea. He was just kind of like spitballing it, but it was Snow's father that pushed it through the government and pushed the idea forward and suggested it when they were students themselves. So it was kind of Snow's dad that started the Hunger Games, which was interesting, but again, not like as a reader surprising. The other thing that could be taken away from it, it's a little bit different, is this showcasing of the idea of Covey, at least ancestors, if not coded as, the traveller community, the Romany community of our time. Racist stereotypes of animalistic natures that are associated with the traveller community, and zoos and circuses, bread and circuses again. How the tributes are kept in this zoo at the beginning. Why am I highlighting the middle of my forehead? I don't know. When we think about the origins of zoos, we have to think about really early zoos, which I remember reading about in this book, so I got it out. The London Zoo in 1828, the Jardin des Plantes in 1793, and the Berlin Zoo in 1844. They brought prestige to the capital, they brought tourists, but the kind of point of them was that capturing the animals was a symbolic representation of the conquest of all distant and exotic lands. They were an endorsement of modern colonial power. So when we look at it from that perspective, we can see the crossover with that and the constant discussions about whether people can be animals when they are not governed properly, and the point of war. Early on in the book, when Snow is forced to write this essay about what he loved about war, he said what had mattered then and what had mattered still was living without fear. He added a paragraph about his deep relief on winning the war, the grim satisfaction of seeing the capital's enemies, who treated him so cruelly, who'd cost his family so much, brought to their knees. He'd loved the unfamiliar sense of safety that their defeat had brought, the security that could only come with power. And then when he's training to be a peacekeeper, he writes this letter to his professor. It's one thing to speak of humans' essential nature theoretically, another to consider it when a fist is smashing into your mouth. I'm not convinced that we are all inherently violent, as you say, but it takes very little to bring the beast to the surface. So really, I guess it's also about that pursuit of elevation above animals, elevation above nature,
which I guess we could link back to my beloved theory about this being a climate change series, wanting to qualify to be above animals, but also not wanting to exercise any of the privileges of being above animals. I'm looking more Trinket, which reminded me of this part in the book that talks about Desmond Morris's work, which proposes that the unnatural behaviour of animals in captivity can help us understand, accept, and overcome the stresses involved in living in consumer societies. So it's about people who study how animals act in captivity and how they become passive and don't fight, don't do much, and how we as citizens of the capital have been trained into subservience ourselves, even though the very theoretical conditions of our society are based on us being better than animals, but actually we're so trainable as animals to be subservient and trade in our freedom for our safety. This is so depressing. That to hold those two contradictory things in our heads, we have to invent things like zoos, whether that's for people or animals, to make us feel better about that, to be like, see, this is normal and fine, to build like Russian dolls within Russian dolls of our own selves. And I think if like Snow does go on a journey in this book, is that he realises that dynasty is what matters to him. He has this line in it that literally says, as he's deciding to turn on Lucy Gray, is what a waste of dynasty. What a waste of the legacy of the family of Snow. They have this saying that's like, snow falls on top, which I just thought was so, I just cringed at that, but that was their family phrase, I guess. He would rather be a passive symbol of his dead relatives than an active member of his real friendships and relationship to the world. And that's ultimately the choice he makes. I kind of simultaneously both hate and love this hair on me. What do you think? I just wish that, and again, not that I think the author owes me this, but from a personal perspective, I just wish that we had heard more of Lucy Gray's story. I just think that, beside the point whether she's good or bad, I think she had more interesting motives, a more complicated path, and her status as part of the only subgroup of this world that really remembers the old world. She sings a song that is actually a poem that was written by Wordsworth in like the 1700s. They sing Molly Malone. Our world, the world of the past, is real to them. They're the only people it's real for. One of the only reasons that Snow decides that it's okay to love Lucy Gray is because like she's not really from the districts. She always argues that she's not a capital citizen. Her people are just held in District 12. I'm just like, mate, isn't that actually everyone? But in Snow's head, he uses that to justify his love for her because he's like, well, she's basically a capital citizen. It's just a mistake that she found herself in the districts. But later on, he refers to them all as birds. Always birds with her when it came to the covey. Singing, perching, feathers in their hats, pretty birds all. Before we get Effie's opinion, in summary, I think that Suzanne Collins' writing is still really good. Some of the scenes in it and some of the like small moments were more vivid to me than stuff that happened in the 3 Hunger Games books. There were some really memorable characters created. I love the parts when we were back in District 12, we were back in the seam, we were watching the Covey perform. That was all really magical. And the end was really explosive, like the end really delivered, and I can see that on film. I just think if you're telling a story from the perspective of President Snow, you either have to give a villain backstory that justifies how evil they are, which is problematic, and I don't think Suzanne Collins did that, or you need to subvert that, and I think she kind of subverted it without really saying much. In that case, it should have told you more about the characters that surrounded him, more about the history of that world, more about like the premise that world is based on, apart from the fact that it's like, well, everyone's animals really, so we'd all just kill each other if nobody was in charge. That's the point of government, which we kind of already got from the other books. And if you watch my other Hunger Games video, you'll know that if there is meaning, I will find it. If there is non-existent subplots that I invent, I would have seen them. If there was pointless earth sign symbolism in them, I was even trying to look for tarot card tableaus and Enneagram references, anything. But apart from my favourite part, which was that at the end it linked back to the Hanging Tree song, and you actually witnessed the story behind the Hanging Tree song and realised that Lucy Gray wrote that song. And in a tragic way, she's named after a character in the William Wordsworth poem that is about a girl who goes missing in the snow. which was a nice Shakespearean, it always had to be this way kind of fatalist twist. I just don't think it gave us a really good zoom in or zoom out of the world. We were kind of put in the middle distance, and I didn't know how to feel about that, because I feel like you learn most about a world from the micro and the macro. Let's do Effie's hair. Also, I know that Suzanne Collins wrote this before coronavirus, and that not everything speaks to this time. But there was this Twitter thread that I saw that kind of reminded me of Snow's mindset, and like linked it to present discussions about how people use privilege and think that the rules don't apply to them. 2 years ago, I came forward with evidence of Dominic Cummings and his campaign committing the largest breach of campaign finance law in British history. This guy talks about how he worked for the Leave campaign and he worked under Dominic Cummings, and he tries to like make sense of why he acts the way he does, in the same way that Suzanne Collins is trying to make sense of Snow. They are not evil people. They are not devoid of the feelings that people like you and I feel. They have families, friends, they party, they have loved ones. But extremism and radicalisation are subtle and sinister for that exact reason. They do not show themselves so easily, but they are lost people. They have spent many years of their lives seeing the world from a perspective that is defined and reiterated by older, more prominent conservatives, elders that are defined by totalitarian identity rooted entirely in preservation. This is why they are so venomously against any idea of justice and fairness. It is a threat to their lifestyles and status quo. So blinded are they by their desires to maintain things for the way they are, they've forgotten the beauty of risk, of joy, of justice and inequality. In the same way, these people have convinced themselves that what they are doing is right, but not just politically right, divinely right. Dominic Cummings is not the big evil villain, he is a symptom of a system that is inherently corrupt. And here's a cincher: we have become too comfortable in balancing the debate. I think that you cannot balance hatred with love. One is dangerous, the other is not. One harms people, the other does not. So he's talking about the idea of the left and right being something we should balance between, being inherently wrong when you look at the facts, and we all agree that the government is there not to harm people. If we agree, like the people of Panem, that the government is there to keep order, to stop the human race, or I think in their case the white human race, from becoming extinct, which is what Panem is founded on, the idea that in the world before the war, with all the climate change stuff going on and the population of the world retreating into a smaller number, it's more important to maintain the most amount of people alive by having a scary totalitarian government to stop everybody from killing each other, because that's what humans inherently do when they're left alone. Not. The principle of Panem is not that every individual citizen is treated with respect and kept safe, just that the race, the idea of the race is. And I suppose that's why I feel like a certain type of conservative government contradicts the very idea of government. It isn't something we can balance and be like, oh, it's a bit like this, it's a bit like that. And that's the clever inherent fear that Suzanne Collins sets us up with when we're opening the book. We're like, oh god, what if President Snow is just the other side of my argument? What if he is the yin to my yang? What if he just sees the world in a different way and is trying to do good in a different way? She subverts the villain narrative by being like, no, he genuinely doesn't care if people die. He's kind of a psychopath. And I'm not going to give you somebody that doesn't love their families or isn't scared for their friends, but I am going to give you who's been inherently corrupted by their idea of war, from seeing bodies mutilated as a child, who struggles to form real empathy for anybody, really, has prioritised safety, and their reading of safety means power over others, above empathy and human connection, and has kind of shut off that part of their brain. And at least I'd like to think that contradicts the premise of Parliament in our world, at least, even if in practice it's become the opposite. So I think, speaking from today, the 27th of May 2020, and all of the context that is wrapped up in that, I have to say that we're all thinking about, what is a politician? What's the point of a politician? What do we really think government is for? And at what point does it contradict that so hard that it is completely redundant? Just girly thoughts. Right, let's hear from Effie. Eyes bright, chins up, smiles on. As some of you will know, I am a long-standing fan of President Snow. What a wonderful and inspirational man. Of course, I was honoured and fascinated to hear more about his terribly fortunate family, although fortunate is perhaps an irresponsible way to refer to fortune that has been so accurately bestowed on those who deserve it, and who will truly use it to adorn the Capitol with the kind of safety and honour it deserves. It was comforting yet troubling to see how many obstacles President Snow faced in his early life, at only 18, being seduced by a grubby temptress who no doubt ate toes for breakfast and brutally murdered people in the arena, and had a dress sense that even I am loath to do a post-mortem on. But if we're going to just skim the surface, I'd say a ruffled rainbow dress, unwashed, is a tribute to no one. And that even being asked to vouch for such a creature was a humility that President Snow should not have had to bear. It also made me relieved to be performing and serving in an era where citizens of Panem really value the Hunger Games. The circulation figures in that first chapter made me shiver. I barely recognised our District 12 without its Victor's Village, and while reading the lyrics to the Covey songs was interesting, if not a little bit excessively put into the book, Suzanne. Next time I visit District 12, I will be reminded how grateful I am of the silence now that music has been legally banned from the region. It is my sad prediction that some Capitol citizens won't really appreciate the beginnings of Snow's story. But the heroic tale of a man poised to defend his dynasty is surely destined to become a Penguin classic. More of a magazine girl myself, I was forced to open a Goodreads account to detail this first book I'd read all year. But while browsing Goodreads, I did find in the archives, it's apparently available at the Pan Am National Library, this book by authors Trini and Susanna, who sound absolutely fascinating. So again, I have to thank President Snow for reawakening my interest in historic fashion. Did you like the book? Actually, no matter, I don't really care. Sorry, I had a mad moment of democracy there. Peacekeepers tell me that there is a playlist here if you'd like to see more videos, and the rebels who make this video possible can be found in the Gumption Club. Subscribing will mean that you never see my face again, because I doubt that I'll ever have the time to do such lowly media. But I trust as a loyal citizen of Panem, you will share this video with a fellow citizen. And if you were to order President Snow's book, to buy it from a huge conglomerate that doesn't pay tax. I don't want to hear any of you buying it from the seam, okay?